Hello friends, fellow Canadians. I'm Christopher M. Michaud, leader of the United Canadian Centrists. This is the Canadianist podcast. Thanks for joining me today. You know, most of us have had this experience. You hear something in the news or you see a post online and it sounds outrageous. It sounds so wrong, so incompetent, so upside down that you almost want to accept it immediately. Because if it confirms your frustration, it feels satisfying. Some people hear it and instantly agree. That's it. We're broken. We're incompetent. We're a mess. But then there's another instinct, and I think many of you share this one. You hear something that sounds too simple, too clean, too perfect as an explanation, and you pause. You think, wait a minute. It can't just be that we're that incompetent. It can't just be that we're sitting on unimaginable wealth and somehow too foolish to use it. There has to be more to the story. There has to be structure, trade-offs, context that isn't being explained. That instinct, that pause is healthy. That's what responsible citizenship looks like. And that brings me to the Facebook comparison making the rounds right now. It goes like this. Canada and Saudi Arabia have roughly the same population. Saudi Arabia has massive oil reserves, no personal income tax, lower national debt, free healthcare, housing support for citizens. Canada has enormous natural resources, far more diversified commodities, yet trillions in federal debt and some of the highest tax burdens in the developed world. And the implied conclusion is blunt. If they can do it, why can't we? Yeah, let's slow it down. Yes, Saudi Arabia holds the second largest proven oil reserves in the world. Canada is third. Both countries are energy heavyweights, but here's the structural difference that changes everything. In Saudi Arabia, oil production is dominated by the state through Saudi Aramco. The profit margin largely flows directly into government hands. The state owns the primary revenue engine. In Canada, oil production is primarily private sector. Companies explore, invest billions in capital, take on risk, and earn profits. Governments collect royalties and corporate taxes, but they don't capture the full margin. That's not a minor detail. That's the entire economic model. So when someone says Saudi Arabia has all this money and no income tax, what they're describing is a state-owned resource system. And now let's talk taxes. Saudi Arabia does not levy personal income tax on citizens. That's true, but it relies heavily on oil exports and consumption taxes. It's also governed as an absolute monarchy. Canada is a parliamentary democracy. We fund universal health care, the Canada Pension Plan, old age security, employment insurance, equalization payments, indigenous transfers, defense commitments, infrastructure and provincial support systems, different governance model, different social contract. Now the debt comparison, Canada's federal debt sits in the trillions. Saudi Arabia's is significantly lower in absolute terms. But debt sustainability isn't just about the headline number. It's about GDP size, economic diversification, interest costs, and long-term growth capacity. Saudi Arabia's economy is heavily concentrated in oil revenue. Canada's economy is diversified across energy, mining, agriculture, finance, tech, manufacturing, and services. That diversification provides resilience when oil prices fluctuate. There's also the housing support argument. Yes, Saudi Arabia offers substantial housing and financial assistance programs. But again, that's funded through centralized oil revenue under a state-controlled model. So here's the real policy question hiding inside that Facebook post. Are we arguing that Canada should nationalize oil? Are we arguing that we should eliminate income tax and fund the country primarily through resource extraction? Because that's not a small tweak. That's a fundamental restructuring of the Canadian economic system. Nationalization impacts investor confidence. It affects provincial jurisdiction over natural resources. It shifts enormous power toward the federal government. Those trade-offs matter. But here's where I think the emotional core of this comparison lands, and I understand it. Canadians feel like we're sitting on enormous wealth and not fully benefiting from it. That's a legitimate concern. Are our royalty structures optimal? Are we adding value domestically instead of exporting raw resources? Should we be building larger sovereign wealth funds so future generations benefit from today's extraction? Those are serious, responsible democratic conversations. But headline comparisons about tax rates and debt levels without structural context don't tell the full story. Canada and Saudi Arabia may have similar populations and massive oil reserves, but they operate under entirely different political, economic, and social systems. The real debate isn't about outrage, it's about stewardship. How do we responsibly manage Canadian wealth within a democratic framework? How do we reduce unnecessary debt growth? How do we ensure prosperity reaches citizens without concentrating excessive power in the state? That's the conversation worth having. I'm Christopher M. Michaud. I'm a Canadianist and leader of the United Canadian Centrist Party. And if this resonates with you, I invite you to continue the conversation at thecanadianist.news. And to find out more about the United Canadian Centrist and our vision for Canada's future, visit uccparty.ca.